morning, good morning. We want to talk today a little bit about polyglot systems or polyglot security holes. And this is the main topic for now. So, okay, slowly people are coming in perfectly. It's an early morning. It's an early morning. So please let me know if you can hear me, if you can see my screen. Good morning, Sana. Oh, I hope I pronounced it right. So one thing, during the talk, you have the possibility to unmute yourself and ask a question. This is perfectly. You don't see your screen. Yes, you're right. I haven't started sharing it. You are right. I will do it. So, I hope now everybody can see my screen. I hope this is better. All good. Perfect. Perfect. So what I wanted to say, how to deal with questions. So feel free to ask at any time a question, so you can unmute yourself. So I'm flexible enough so that I can handle this one quite well. So if you have any question, just let me know. You can write it to the chat. I try to have an eye on this chat, but it's a tiny window there. So I try to have an eye on this, and if I see the question, then I will give an answer. Otherwise, in the end, we have a Q&A, and then you can use this time as well. So polyglot security holes, what we want to do today, we want to ask a bit of, where's my slide? So first of all, thank you for attending in this early morning. My name is Sven, and I'm working for JFrog. JFrog is a DevOps company from Israel, and we just joined NASDAQ, and these are exciting times, I can say it, exciting times. So on the other way, I'm using the COVID time to do what I really like to do during my childhood. I'm back in the forest. And this means that I'm not traveling. Nobody's traveling anymore, so that's good. So I'm taking my kids, going to the forest. And in the forest, I start recording my talks. So if I'm not giving a live talk, I'm recording my talks, and I'm pushing all this stuff to YouTube. So if you want to see some IT outdoor style videos, check out my YouTube channel. They're available in German as well as in English. So if you want to connect to me, Twitter is very good. LinkedIn is very good. Don't use email, please. Don't use emails. So no, this one. So what I want to start is that if you're talking about polyglot systems, and I wanted to focus here on an example based on web components, I just want to have here a short starting point. If you're looking at this part of cloud native, it's the same for monolith, it's for whatever architecture. I just want to jump in because yesterday I had a talk explicit about this one that was focusing more on this. Today I want to highlight here just the key words in the beginning. So it means in this cloud native world, we have the service-oriented architecture with API communication. It means that you have dedicated parts that are talking to each other. And the good thing is that over this API, you can just split up the whole architecture in different parts that are technology, from the technology point of view, independent. Independent means that you can deal on every side with different environments, different ecosystems, different toolings, and so on. So in the main thing, it means that we have smaller parts that are split up compared to a monolith, and we can start thinking earlier about the rewrite in compared to a refactoring. So we can just decide to rewrite it because it's a smaller step. Smaller step or a smaller part means that you have the freedom to try things out. And trying things out means that if you are a core Java developer and you are writing the first microservice in Go, you can transfer some knowledge for sure, but in the end, you have to learn again. So a senior in Java is not a senior in Go immediately. So you will be there quite fast because you can use all the stuff you learned, but sometimes it's tricky because sometimes you're adopting things in a way that's not should be done in this way. There's one split off for security reasons. So we have this service or API oriented stuff. This is more the concept phase. Tools are supporting it slightly, but it's more or less a done by a human, what's the right split between use case and all this stuff. But if you're going to the technical side, so this infrastructure, the whole DevOps part, the working part, the tooling will be more and more good, and then you can just use the machine to help you dramatically in terms of convenience, in terms of handling polyglot systems, in terms of dealing with compliance and vulnerabilities. So this is one thing. If you're going here to this part, we are just looking now at one single point because I want to focus on this example with web components and polyglots stuff inside this single microservice. Because if you have a big microservice system that's composed by different microservices, every microservice is per definition in a polyglot world. So you can write everything in a different technology, language, whatever. But if you're going inside this single microservice, we have to fight with this polyglot stuff in the same way. It's a little bit more hidden, but the main thing is here, if you're looking at this tech stack, it's more or less you're writing your application, you're wrapping it in Linux and Docker so that it can be distributed and orchestrated in Kubernetes. And the DevOps, or now the DevSecOps part, and this is interesting, they are talking explicit about DevSecOps instead of DevOps, means that we have to deal with security everywhere. So from the first minute up to running in production, we have to think about security in the same way like we have to think about quality and other cross-cut things. So one important thing is if you have a vulnerability inside your application during the coding phase, and this is where we want to focus on today, is that this vulnerability will be existing in every layer after this. So you're wrapping new technologies around for convenience or for needs. And the vulnerability will be there. And at first it's sleeping, but you never know if you can combine this to more aggressive attack vectors. What I'm explicitly excluding here is the concept phase. Why? The concept phase itself is a very important phase. Thinking about an algorithm. In the concept phase, you're deciding for an algorithm. And if this algorithm is a bad one, even if you're implementing this one in a perfect way and you're tweaking the technology, a better algorithm will most likely beat. So it will most likely be the winner. So the concept phase is very, very tricky. It's a very important one. But from the point of the tooling, we are excluding this one because mostly it's in a way that we have here more the human that is working, and later we have more the machine that can support you. So shift left is this term. If you're rotating this one, shift left means as early as possible, just to have a buzzword that you can start searching for. If you're new in this field of DevSecOps, search for shift left. And shift left means that you're rotating this picture, or it's the way I can remember it, this word. And as early as possible, you should start. So shift left means start as early as possible with security. That is the main thing here, because then you have the best impact if the base is good. It's like quality. If you start immediately with quality of the whole production line, you will have most likely a better result than just have one quality phase in the end. So the example I want to give here is if you have a microservice, and inside this microservice, you have now not a REST interface, you have to create some administrative web UI or whatever. So it's just an example. Don't nail me on this one if this makes sense or not, but it's an example. You have to write a web UI, and you're a Java developer, you're mostly a server-side developer, and you want to deal with a graphical interface now. So I will just highlight some steps how to map this one. If you want to have a more detailed view in a practical view, check out my upcoming YouTube video. It's not online until now, but it's coming during the next few days. Web components for Java devs and TDD for Java devs on my YouTube channel, or check out my talk from yesterday. It will be available as well. So I had a more detailed view on this one yesterday. So we are talking about web components. It's based on HTML5, CSS, and JavaScript. This is something a Java developer is not used to. Sometimes they don't like this tech stack. It's a different tech stack, and it's completely the opposite from what you're doing on the server side. So now you're a server side one and you want to use your Java. So what do you need? What you can do is you can ramp up the stack. So communication could be in Java to communicate to this client-side web components. And then you can create a Java component on the server side. You're migrating this pure client-side web component to a server-side component, to a server-side state version of this web component. There are pros and cons. So the pros are it's easier to make it secure because you can hold possession this state. So if you're deactivating a button and you have this state on the server side, and even if you have a compromised client and someone is clicking this button and you will get this command, you can just say, okay, I know this button is not active, and so you can just ignore it. You can do it more or less on the pure client side as well, but you have to deal a little bit more in a more complex way of this. So sometimes just a flavor. So if you like this one or that one, or if you have technical needs or customer needs, I don't want to say A is better than B, but they are different. So pure client side and server side one, but with both versions, you can write progressive web apps so that you are have the same feeling on a mobile. You have this state that you can persist between two invocations of the program and so on. So this is a different topic, but if you're a server-side guy and you want to code in Java, you most likely want to stay there because then you can use your tooling, you can use your knowledge, and then it will lead you to something that you have some kind of generic communication, and then this Java component you want to use. And if you want to use JUnit 5, for example, against this web component, you would have to create a test component as well, because then we are handling with a different technology. But in the end, what you can do is you can think about there is this client-side web component, there is this communication layer in between, and then you have this Java component. There is something that will help you dramatically. I will come to this one right now, because if you start writing all this stuff by yourself from scratch, it would be more or less pain, because you would have to do this communication stuff, this handling, long polling stuff, and so on. And there's this open source framework called Vardin, and they are doing exactly this one. They're mapping this web component against the Java component, and they have this generic layer inside. I don't want to go into the detail of this one because this was covered yesterday and it's available on YouTube. But here, just as a recap, if you're on the client side, you have, for example, this command npm install to grab components. It's like a dependency in your POM. And with Java, with Vardin Flow, you have an annotation that's doing exactly the same. So you have an annotation npm package, then you're addressing this component. It's doing exactly the same stuff in the end, like npm install, so grabbing this component. If you want to have it somewhere active on a page, you have to write something like an import and then something like this. Think about an import in Java, it's the same. And for this, they created this annotation JS module, and then you're just declaring what component explicit you want to have. And last but not least, it's the tag. So the components are based on custom tags that you're using inside your HTML5. And if this tag is a UI5 minus badge, for example, then you can just use here the declaration add tag with the same name. So this is just a mapping one-to-one from technology steps from the pure web component world to the Java world. If you're using the Vardin Flow open source stack here, just have a look. You don't need to use this Vardin components. If you don't like them, just ignore them. You can use this internal API flow server, and this is a quite stable API over the years. So it's not bad in terms of changing internal stuff or so. So you can trust it because they are depending on it as well. So it's a quite stable API. So you have this mapping between these technologies, and what you will get out is a result that will give you here something like, oh, I have now an UI5 badge. What I'm mapping here as an example is UI5, SAP UI5 components. Why? Because there is no server-side implementation. It's a pure web component. It's definitely not from Vardin. If you like or don't like this SAP UI5, this is not the point here. It's a point that it's just an example how to map a third-party web component ecosystem completely to the server side. And this was working well. I will give you the GitHub repository where I have mapped the most of them already, so that you can grab this one to see how it's done, how it's feeling and practical. You can extend it, you can use it as a Apache license, so feel free. But for a server-side developer, it would look like now like new UR5 badge instead of NPM and all this stuff. Then you can set attributes, get attributes and all this. So this means that at this point, you would have the feeling like a core Java developer. And this is good in terms of convenience, but it's bad in terms of security in some kind. Why? What we have done now, what we have done is that we have this application and we are just adding a Maven dependency, but in the end, we are adding two technologies. We are adding the Maven world and we are adding the NPM world. And the NPM JavaScript world in terms of security is different to the world of Java. I don't want to say better or whatever, but they're definitely different. So it means if you're just, if you're working in a team and someone is mapping, for example, this for convenience, or someone in the company mapped this for convenience, and you see there's a Maven dependency, you're just grabbing it, you see, oh, there's your 5 badge, I have to ramp up a software component, and this is the way to run, then it's nice for you because it's convenient, but in the end, you are adding indirectly a new tech layer, a complete new tech stack, and you have a few things that are not nice here. So not nice is that you have a different technology in the background with a different life cycle. This can be complex. The next thing that is not really nice is that you're adding new vulnerabilities in technologies you're not aware of or not really dealing with because it's masked, it's hidden, it's somewhere. And one other thing is that compliance is a mess if you start mixing technologies, and in every community is a way to deal with licensing and how strict they are following this one, and this is not always the same. And there's one thing, just have in mind, the most stuff you're doing or using is open source. This is good, I love open source, but on the other side, have in mind, most likely the stuff is written from persons in their private time, they are not paid for it, they are doing it like a hobby, so they just like to do it and they're giving it for free. So what I totally understand, if they are not really interested in checking all laws and compliant things, because that's not their attention. And hey, it's not a company, it's mostly private persons that are doing this stuff and they're doing great work. But if you're using this one in a company, in a project or product, you must be aware of this one. So what you need is some kind of scanning unit that will give you exactly this one. So what I want to say here is that you have these dependencies, you have these mask technologies, and then you have to find a way how to scan this stuff. I will come to this in a few minutes back. If you have this on the coding phase, you want to have it for the testing phase itself. So it makes no sense to have a Java new batch and then you have a completely different testing environment. So if you're mapping to the Java world, do the job right. So not just mapping the half and the other half you're just doing with some other tool. So it would make sense to map the test world as well. And for this, you need the web app. For example, here with Vardin, you have the servlet container, but on the other side, you have this browser. You need Selenium to work with it, the robot that is redirecting requests to the browser. And then you need some kind of test definition and test runtime. So this tech stack is a bit complex because you have a different life cycle, you have different technologies involved, and so on. So first of all, this test bench I'm just mentioning here as an example is a commercial product, but the good thing is it's open source. So why I'm mentioning it, I don't want to sell it, but I want to give you a point where you can look at source code to learn how to do this stuff, or that it is possible. There are some other projects around that are working with this, but the main concept here is again the same. You have this core web element on the Selenium side, and you have to map it on something that is typed, for example, a button element, a table element, and so on. if you're looking in this implementation from TestBench, you will find this class TestBench element, and this is their generic way to map against web elements. And then again, you can just here using this getters and setters to set properties, get properties, and you're mapping against tags from the custom web component you mapped on the Java side. If you're done this one, the good thing is that you can focus on your lifecycle. Even this can now be completely managed in the Java world. Here I'm just, it's just an example. If you want to use JUnit 5, you can do it with extensions. You can start a servlet container, WebDriver extension. This stuff you have to write by yourself. Some of this is available as open source, some you have to write by yourself. But in the end, what you can do, you can manage the whole lifecycle inside Java. And now what you have the web component in Java, you have the test component in Java, you have the whole life cycle in Java. And now you can work completely in your Java ecosystem to map this one. And you can just write plain JUnit 5 tests against custom web components. And this is an amazing approach, because then you can use your full tool stack and you're not leaving your ecosystem, your expertise, your field of expertise. On the other side, have in mind, if you're writing here something, it is going indirectly to different technologies. So here's this example, SAP UI5. Just as a recap, you can check it here on GitHub. It's on Apache license. And the tricky thing here is, if you start testing with different technologies, you have this life cycle, for example, I have to start a WebDriver, I have to start a servlet container. You see that this life cycle during this testing phase will be different, but what most people are just not thinking about is that you have this context, and this context itself is now not only a Java context, it's an NPM or a client-side context as well. So during the phase you're dealing with this one and you're doing a full stack test, have in mind that you're cleaning up not only the Java context, you have to think about all this stuff. This is quite okay. Testing web apps is maybe not the best example to have an easy example, but if you're at this point, you can extend it now. So we have this Java representation of this web component. We can test it with Java, and immediately what we could do is we can think about using the Java stack, for example, for security payload testing. So you have your web app and you're generating compromised binaries, for example, storing them in a repository so that these security payloads are bound to a version of your software. And then if you're rerunning the security payload testing, what you could do is just, you're ramping up this stack with Java, you're grabbing this binary, you're feeding your JUnit test with this compromised binaries and see how this will work. So even the security test, you can shift now to the Java world because you have this full stack test, you're dealing indirectly with all these technologies. If you want to know how to do this one, or if you want to have some ideas to work with JUnit 5 in a more generic way, check out my YouTube channel for this custom test engines talk. I will explain how to ramp up your own custom test engine. This is perfect to deal with complex lifecycles and all this stuff. If the regular way of going over extensions is too complex. Yeah, this one. So an example how to harden Vaadin Flow I have on YouTube already, and it's called How to Harden Vaadin Flow. It's available in German and English. And then I will show how to work against this test stack against known vulnerabilities. But what we have so far, we saw that over all technologies, what we are doing is that we are dealing in some kind of dependencies. So in the application, for example, Maven, now with Maven and NPM, in the Linux layer with Debian repositories, Docker repositories, and so on. And don't forget, we have this tool stack. So even this could be stored in a generic repository. Why repositories? Because repositories, they're holding the biggest part of your tech stack, even of your production line. And if you have this logical point that can handle all these different kind of repositories and generic one so that you can create your own type of repository, you can use Artifactory at this logical point because it's handling all these different kind of technologies. And with X-Ray, you can start scanning against it. So the good thing here is that if you start scanning against dependencies, you are scanning the biggest part of your system compared to you are scanning your source code you are just writing. I don't want to say that this scanning techniques for the source code are bad, but I think they will need more time to be better. It's a good approach. It's the right direction to scan this part as well. But so far as this machine learning stuff, and it's not so good that you can just take it and use it. On the other side, if 99% of your application is a dependency and you start checking dependencies, you have a really low-hanging fruit. So you need to declare some generic rules and policies. In Artifactory and X-Ray, it's a concept of rules and policies. So with rules, you say, if I have a vulnerability, do this one or that one. And with policies, you can combine these rules. And then with watches, you can say, okay, this stateless definition, what should happen? I'm applying on NPM, I'm applying on Docker, I'm applying on, and so on. If you're using a different tool, it will be different words or different techniques. But in the end, what you need is you must be aware of, if you're defining security rules, it should be in a way that's generic so that you can apply the same rules against different tech stacks. And you must make sure that if you're dealing with this transitive dependencies or with these hidden technologies, that this tech stack will be scanned as well, so that this scanning is not stopping at the first tech layer. So you need the full impact graph. So it's good to deal with open source. As I mentioned, I really like open source because it gives you the freedom to modify, to help, to create, to analyze, to learn all this stuff. And it's good because grabbing a dependency means that you're focusing on your use case. You're not reinventing the wheel, but there are the vulnerabilities. And one weak point of open source is if the owner of this project is not really taking care about this compliance stuff, it could be a showstopper. That's it. So because he's using a transitive dependency, that's just pausing for your business. So compliance, the good thing is compliance are just partially in your system. So if there's some license in some tiny library, you can think about just changing the semantic within semantic equal version. A little bit more poison are vulnerabilities, because vulnerabilities are in some layers, but you can combine them to more complex attack vectors. So you need the full view of the full impact graph of all technologies to understand, to analyze, and if you have everything in repositories so that you can recreate the state again and again, you can analyze what happened if something happened. Have in mind, we have different times, so from found to public available information. Most likely you have no impact on this one, but from public available information until it's consumable, you have some kind of impact. You can pay for this information to get it earlier. You can just wait until it's available, whatever it's necessary. But the most impact you have is the information is consumable and it's running in production. It means during the time you're just creating your software and you're providing a new version of your library, or it is running in your server environment, or it's delivered to your customers. So have in mind that from information is consumable up to running in production is the biggest part you can influence, and you should focus here on this one. So the good thing is vulnerabilities and compliance against this tech stacks is most likely good. If you have a good test coverage, this is just your safety belt, because you can just switch between versions, run in good test coverage, and then let it go. So instead of line coverage, I highly recommend mutation test coverage. If you want to know more about mutation test coverage, check out my YouTube channel. I have a talk about mutation testing, German and English. Otherwise, I think there was a talk in this conference already. Maybe there you'll find some more information about it. But test coverage in general is a safety belt against vulnerabilities, because if you know something, you can change very fast, and then you can ship it to production very fast without any changes, because you can switch major version changes or minor version changes or in different implementation, because you have to find a semantic equal implementation. So dependency management has the highest impact. And imagine just, you would start now with a proof of concept. You are a developer and you start typing, you have this use case. You can start now with something and you just want to go. It would be good if you just typing your first dependency inside your POM XML, because you want to start, and what you will see is the amount of vulnerabilities of your dependencies and the combined license information. For this one, you should need or you should use an IDE integration. We have this IDE integration for IntelliJ, VS Code, Eclipse. All this is open source. So if you want to modify it or you want to transform it to another IDE, just feel free, clone it, work on it, make merge requests, feature requests, whatever. And I showed in a YouTube video how this can be used, and you can just try it. But the good thing is you're just adding a dependency, and immediately inside your IDE, you will see, oh, there's a vulnerability. Is this important for me? Yes or no? I'm switching a version. There's a version with a fix. There's a transitive dependency I have to override, and so on and so on. So the next thing, if you wrote your stuff, you start writing now your Docker file, because you want to ship it in production in Kubernetes. So the next would be you're editing a Docker file. And the first thing you're doing is you're writing from. From is a dependency. What a surprise. So it would be good if you have some possibilities to do some ad hoc queries against the full stack if you're not inside your IDE, for example. For this, we have this impact graphs in the web UI. So here you see, okay, I have this dependency, it's in this Docker layer and this use in this Docker image. And then you would see, okay, this jar is here and there and so on. So you see the whole impact graph. This is just one representation. The data is available via REST API, so you can feed it just to your compliance tooling, what you need. On the other side, if you have your Docker file, you want to ship it now to Kubernetes. And if you're reading a little bit about Kubernetes, it's again the same stuff. So you have this plain text, but unsecure libs, bugs, outdated Docker images, untrusted. It's always some basic stuff like plain text password. Yeah, come on. You shouldn't use it. So this is just one thing that's based on the human. So don't use plain text passwords. But on the other side, the most vulnerabilities are coming, unsecure libs, bugs, outdated images, and so on. So again, we are just talking about dependency management of the whole stack. So for this one, if you have this repository and scanning mechanism, you can just work on the whole stack, again, this one, and changing this one. What you can do as a developer is you can harden the Docker images. You need the possibility to continuously rescan, even if this image is in production. You have it inside your repository. With an update of the security database, you must immediately be informed if there is now a known vulnerability, yes or no. But there's only one thing. If you're dealing with Kubernetes, you have this Kubernetes dynamic admission webhooks that make sure that if you have a new image, you can deal with a challenge how to activate all images to kill instance, restart them, and so on. And the other thing is, what's most important, you can use or you can say to Kubernetes, please just use this central Docker registry. So that's not grabbing from somewhere this Docker images. So that's going to your Docker registry, and there you have all scannings. There you can block. There you can be informed, and so on. So the central repository makes sense. Check out jfrog/kubnap. Then you find this admission webhook so that you can work with this one. Security is nothing if you're just generating and dealing over different tech layers. If you're not doing something, you have the possibility, if you're finding something in your Polyglot stack to break a build. This is way late because then you've wasted already some time. So I'm really highly appreciate the way if you can go to the IDE instead, because then you're not wasting time until the first CI run is done. But you can notify and all this. But the really important things I personally think is if you're able to trigger webhooks so that you can push stuff out to trigger workflows. And if a third party needs it, that he can just grab the information via the REST API. So I'm more or less in time, 35 minutes. So it's an official time to start with the Q&A. If you want to start with this one, you can just use the start free. And if you don't want to try it by yourself, you just want to see how it's going. And if it's what you're searching for, check out, I have a YouTube video, German and English, about how to start a free tier. So what you are doing, what's necessary, what data we are using, all this, it's written on the webpage. But if you just want to see it on a YouTube video, check out this one. And if you want to have an overview about the platform, what's available inside, just check out my video about the platform overview. Otherwise, if you want to try it, just 10 minutes, then you have it. You're just registering, and then you have Artifactory and X-Ray at least, and then you can start with creating your repositories, connecting immediately with your IDE and scanning your existing project. So this is one thing. What you could do after creating this repository, just create a remote Maven repository to Maven Central, activate this one in your POM, add a dependency, make a clean verify, and then check what you will get and what you have. That's the easiest way. Just as a recap, if you want to see how this is done with Vardy in Flow, I have this video here. So yeah, that's it. So it is time for questions. So I will check what is here. So does JFrog have items own CI system now? So the main thing is we have a CI system that's highly integrated, and we have the possibility here that is a little bit complex to build with other CI environments. So first of all, Artifactory and X-Ray you can use with TeamCity, Jenkins, and all this stuff. But with CI, with our CI called pipelines, we have the full integration with the build information and all this stuff. So you're really having an immutable snapshot of the build itself, so with all information. And one thing is, with pipelines, you can use immutability in a very cool way. So it means, let's imagine you have a long-running pipeline with 10 steps, and you're running up to step 5, and step 5 is not working well. So you have a break here. What you can do is you can create a virtual repository, and with every step you create a new local repository where all the binaries that are created are pushed through. The next step will have the same virtual repository, but for this step you are adding the local repository from the previous step as well. So in the end you have always the same virtual repository, but in every step you are including the output of the previous repository. If a step failed, you can just delete this local repository and everything is clean again, and you can just start from this step again. So this is true immutability, and how you can kill rebuilds with this. By the way, I have it on YouTube, check it out. And yeah, and it's that pipelines free for at least open source projects. So I think we have in a free tier some stuff like pipelines. I'm not really sure what's the latest here, but I think with the free tier you can use the JFrog platform for free, but with limitations in terms of space. So you can't use this repository for your own storage with 10 terabyte or whatever. So check out the web page. There you will find what's included, what not. I think this edges is not included, so that you are pushing to different geolocations or whatever. So that's it. But I think pipelines is in as well. So just check it out, please. But for the most people, it's important to have Artifactory and X-Ray to start immediately with vulnerability scanning. Okay, any other questions? Isn't it also another latency when adding new dependency to projects? I just got a question. Isn't it also another latency when adding new dependencies to projects? Well, latency in terms of what? So if you're adding dependencies, you need to grab them. And good advice, checking the shorter history, is that you start making copies again. So don't trust Docker Hub because they're just switching from holding a Docker image until whatever to now 6 months, or what they're doing, throttling bandwidth and all this stuff. So it's good if everything you have as a dependency, you're storing somewhere by yourself. So this good advice of storing. The next one is that latency in terms of technology. If you mean this latency, so deal with different technologies means, yeah, you have different sources of vulnerabilities. And if you're dealing with latency in terms of there's a request from the server side that's going to the client side, there is some kind of latency, but it depends on the architecture itself. So maybe I need some more context what you mean exactly with latency. Okay, Bintray, yes, Bintray is a free one. Check time. The check time that JFrog will need to check. This is a good question because we are fast. The good thing is we are scanning binaries, and they worked heavily on improving this performance. So sometimes I have big projects and immediately I'm typing this stuff in my POM, and I have this information more or less in a second about my dependency tree in Maven. If you're checking I don't know, 10 gigabytes of Docker images. It will take some seconds, but most likely X-Ray is good in terms of performance. If you're installing this one on-prem, so you can have it software as a service, you can have it on-prem. If you're installing it on-prem, it's just up to you how much resources you want to invest. It's not so dramatic, but you can build hybrid solutions as well. So if you're in a high-sec environment, you can build it in your high-sec environment, and you have external nodes that is grabbing the updates from the security databases. You transfer it in your high security network, and then, but the scanning itself is one of the really good things compared to maybe other solutions. So it's time to check this we have. Any other questions? Otherwise, if you have any questions later, just ping me on Twitter, connect via LinkedIn. I would really appreciate to have new subscribers on YouTube, because since COVID, I started working on my YouTube channel. So please help me to grow. And yeah, that's it. What I can give to the community. Instead of traveling, I can now share from the German forest some thoughts. If you have some ideas what I should cover, by the way, just ping me and give me some ideas. I'm always looking for new ideas to talk about. Okay, I would say thank you very much that you're attending the earliest session here today. Stay safe and goodbye.